Protect your heating element. To start, turn on air before turning on electricity. To stop, turn off electricity and allow air to flow until welder is cool, approximately 3 to 5 minutes. Tacking pieces together with the tacking tip. The welder does not have to be turned off when changing tips, but it is important that you use pliers for the job since tips get extremely hot. Tips should not be over-tightened, but should fit snugly. Over-tightening could make them difficult to remove once the welder has cooled. The general rule is most products to be welded should be joined together first by tacking. Using the welder with the tacking tip, form a hinge bond between the two edges. This is done by drawing the point of the tip firmly along the joint to be welded and pressing evenly on both sections. The point of the tip will fuse a thin line along the joint to form a small hinge and help ensure a uniform weld later. The Sealy tack welding tip is perfect for use in alignment of all pieces to be welded. It also serves to hold sections together during actual welding. Tack welds can be easily broken apart without damage, and they can be retacked if necessary. The tacking tip should only be used for tacking. When welding a mitered joint, you should be sure the pieces you are about to join are prepped and all edges beveled to fit as snugly as possible. After you've placed the pieces together using your tacking procedure, tack all sides. Note the continuous tack going across all open seams to assure proper alignment. Welding thermoplastic with the round tip. Here are some tips to follow for doing quality welds. Clean all surfaces to be welded. Cut welding rod at a 60-degree angle. Do not attempt to stretch the rod over the weld. The length of the rod should match that of the weld. This is accomplished by pushing straight down on the rod. Hold the rod vertically to the surface. Apply heat with a fanning motion so equal heat is distributed between rod and base material. Always apply downward pressure on the welding rod. Look for small beads of juicing to form along each side of the weld where the rod meets the base material. This lets you know the rod and material are at proper temperature for welding. If the rod or material chars or discolors, they have been overheated and you will get a weak weld. When heated to correct temperature, the finished weld bead will have a round contour. The rod will hold its basic round shape. With correct downward pressure on the welding rod and the proper fanning motion of the welder, note the smooth contour shape of the welding rod. When welding an outside corner, some key points to remember are: be sure that your welding rod is at a vertical angle to the weld. Keep a steady fanning motion of heat on the welding rod and the base material, and a steady downward pressure on the welding rod, checking for small beads of juicing. If pressure and temperature are correct, a slight juicing on each side of the welding rod should appear. A steady motion around the corner will result in a perfect weld bead. Welding thermoplastic with the speed tip. The speed tip is an automatic feed tip that is designed for high-speed production welding. Make sure your welder is set at the correct air pressure and heat setting for the thermoplastic material being welded. Cut the welding rod at a 60-degree angle. Insert rod into the feeder tube so the rod protrudes about 1/4 inch past the end of the tip. Once started with the high-speed tip, you must keep moving, since the tip is continually softening the rod. To stop the high-speed weld before the rod is fully used, set the end of the weld with firm pressure and draw the welder off the remaining rod. Be sure you do not leave the welding rod in the feeder tube or it will melt and clog the opening. Occasionally, it will be necessary to clean the feeder tube with a wire brush. Continue a steady, smooth motion along the seam without stretching the welding rod. Keep a consistent downward pressure on the welder and watch for the slight juicing on each side of the weld bead, indicating your temperature, speed, and pressure are correctly being applied. The speed tip will increase production 5 to 6 times faster than hand welding and helps eliminate long-run hand fatigue. It will also produce a long uniform weld. Note, at the end of your weld, run the bead slightly over the edge of the beginning of your weld bead. Pull your welder straight off of the welding rod. Use a sharp tool to trim any excess material. When welding an inside corner, the following steps should be observed. Be sure that you have a consistent bead forming along the seam. Keep a constant, even downward pressure on the welder and constantly check for a slight juicing on each side of your welding rod. When welding around an inside corner, it is recommended that you manually feed the welding rod through the feeder tube to assure proper adhesion in the corner. When starting your vertical weld, be sure to preheat the starting corner. Feed the rod manually through the feeder tube, pushing the point of the rod directly into the corner, and start your vertical weld from that point. The procedure for speed welding miter joints is as follows. Insert the rod into the feeder tube. Press down with one even motion and continue watching the rod so the juicing appears, and do not overheat. When it is required to run multiple beads, it is recommended that you weld the center bead first, then the bottom bead, then the top bead for greater strength to your weld.